Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for GMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
And a big thank you to all of our amazing patrons for their incredible generosity. More on how you can support the channel at the end of this episode. But for now, we got part 3 of our tier ranking every cantrip in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. It's been a long haul, but we're finally on the final stretch.
We are going to look at the last batch of cantrips. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, you can check those out over there. But today we're going to finish off the list, and at the end we're going to present all of our S tier, A, B, C, and D tier cantrips that Monty and I have given respectively. Up on screen right now, you are going to see the criteria that we use to rank the cantrips. In essence, an S tier is a cantrip that if it's available to you, you should probably take it, and you might even consider picking up a feat like Magic Initiate in order to grab it. An A tier cantrip is going to be one that, if you have access to it, definitely consider taking it. B represents build. These cantrips are going to be great in certain situations for certain characters. A C tier cantrip might be excellent in niche situations, but might not come up all that often, and a D tier cantrip is one that you probably don't want to consider.
With all that, let's dive right in to Sacred Flame. I love this cantrip so much, I named the largest religion in my campaign setting after it.
That's true.
But the reality is it's just okay. It's great for clerics as your go-to damage-dealing cantrip if you gotta have one. But not all clerics need to have one, and there's other really good options that compete with Sacred Flame, but nevertheless, radiant damage on a failed dexterity saving throw is nothing to sneeze at. It's 1d8 damage. Again, the downside of Sacred Flame is that it's a dexterity saving throw. Monsters that have good dexterity saving throws tend to have really good ones, and those that don't tend to have really bad ones. So you're going to end up in some situations where just they're always making their saves against it. But it ignores cover, which is kind of cool, I guess.
I do think that is worth considering, though, is that as opposed to an attack-based spell where cover will come into play, this spell just, if you can see them, you can hit them. And what's interesting is it says that you have to be able to see the target. So if they're behind total cover, it doesn't work. However, we come into that weird stipulation where is a character that is behind a window behind total cover. And if the answer is yes, you can still see them. Therefore, you can still hit them with Sacred Flame, because it says you can ignore all cover as long as you can see your target. I do think that Sacred Flame is a go-to for clerics. It's also only available to clerics. I want to say that in terms of cantrips that you would be considering, this is high on my list of cantrips to consider as a cleric, and I want to give it an A.
Yeah, I think it's, strictly speaking, it's a B, but for clerics, it's kind of like, well, what else are you going to take?
It's this or Toll the Dead.
Yeah, and Toll the Dead is definitely better.
I agree, but sometimes I want both.
Yeah.
Because two different saving throws.
Yeah.
So, A or B?
I think it's a B for me, just to acknowledge that it's... The radiant damage is good, but the attack roll, I would much rather it be an attack roll-based spell.
That's fair. Next up, we have Shape Water available for druids, sorcerers, and wizards. Again, this falls into that category. We've looked at the Control Flame, the Mold Earth, Gust. Now we're at the water version. It's going to allow you to do things like change the direction of water, change the color and opacity of water. You can freeze water. You can make small little water shapes. None of this can do any damage to a target. It specifies that. Even the freezing of the water, there cannot be a creature inside the water that you're freezing. This one falls for me on the medium spectrum of usefulness in terms of these spells. I think that Gust and Mold Earth are both better, but I think this one might have more applications than the Control Flame. I do think that freezing water actually solves a lot of problems.
That's the thing with this spell, is like moving the water around, changing its color, but freezing a 5-foot cube of water instantaneously, that feels like shenanigans. Like, that's a 5-foot by 5-foot by 5-foot cube of ice. It feels like there's something like mischievous that you can do with that.
I mean, my first thought is, oh no, the DM's stuck us on one end of a flowing river. However, will we cross? And you have a cantrip, so literally right away you could freeze and walk across. And since you're not in combat, hopefully, you can just continue to freeze and create a little ice bridge. They do last for an hour, but you can only have 2 of these effects at a time. So you can create 10 feet of ice, get everybody to shuffle forward, create the next 5 feet, shuffle forward. And you can get across watery hazards.
I guess it just feels. I mean, it works.
It solves problems, and you're at first level.
But
so.
I'm trying to think of like ways that you could like creatively, like. I mean,
it does specify
you don't
not
even
doing
need
damage.
Like look at. We know how much of a problem ice is in Canada.
So here's the question about how permissible your DM is. If I freeze ice, if like my enemies are standing in a puddle and I freeze the ice, no, it doesn't freeze them in place. But is it difficult terrain now? Are they slipping?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still thinking about all the ways that you can use the frozen ice as some sort of weaponized projectile, but I feel like you're still...
That's pushing the boundaries, because they try very hard in here to say, don't do damage with this cantrip. But again, how permissible is your DM? If I freeze a block of if I'm in a scenario where I can somehow get this block of ice to slide down a ramp into some enemies, what does it do? So I feel like there's shenanigans here, but I don't think it's as immediately useful as some of the other spells in this category, so I'm giving this one a C.
I'm going to give it a B just because I believe in the shenanigans.
Fair enough.
Shillelagh is a classic druid cantrip that turns your walking stick into a magic beating stick. Basically, when you cast a spell as a bonus action, you take a club or quarterstaff or walking stick, and it becomes magical. And for that next minute, you can use your wisdom or spellcasting ability modifier, it's wisdom for a druid, for your attack and damage rolls with it, and it does 1d8. This is a great little cantrip that upgrades whatever weapon you might be wielding that would have required you to use your strength score, which is not good, into using your really good spellcasting ability modifier. I love this spell. I think it's really good. The thing about it is that it's hard to use it because it's not better damage than a real martial weapon or a two-handed martial weapon, but it's still respectable.
The fact is, if you're using a real martial weapon, you're probably using a worse stat and are less likely to hit with it. So this does allow you to use your magical stats, which makes it a viable melee weapon for a spellcaster. My nature cleric picked this up and uses it all the time. Now, it's really fun when they have Shillelagh, Spiritual Weapon, and Spirit Guardians going.
Yeah.
Because they're just running around hitting everything all the time. So there's a lot of fun to be had with Shillelagh, and although I think it is very high on the list of druid necessities, and if you do have access to it, I think that you should take it. So I do think it's an A. I don't think it's quite an S.
I think it's a B. I think it really depends on the build. It's the definition of that. I think that for characters that don't build around Shillelagh, it's just fun. Like, it's fine. But there are ways to make your character based around wisdom, and Shillelagh is one of those ways to sort of enable that. And so if you are doing that sort of build where just like with the Hexblade, where you want to build around charisma being your main stat for everything, Shillelagh can kind of enable that. But it doesn't have the combos that, say, the Hexblade does, because it's kind of harder to make wisdom work as an attack stat than it initially appears.
I feel you. I'm still going to stick with A, and the reason for that is because I've seen this branch beyond druid. I've seen a cleric build around having Shillelagh. I've actually built a ranger who took the druid fighting style with a quarterstaff and polearm master and Shillelagh.
But that's definitionally the build thing.
Okay, you're right. But there are so many reasons to consider Shillelagh.
Yes, but if you don't do those things, it's If you do those things, it's great. So, and like, I think that there's a lot of clerics and there's a lot of druids and that maybe wouldn't even bother with it.
Okay, here's the deal. I will lower my ranking to an A-, which means on the screen you're still going to see an A, but I'm agreeing that there might be some limitations.
Again, I'm going to give a qualified B by saying that this definitely depends, and it's a really good cantrip. You can still take it and love it, and you can build around it if you want to. But for me, it's a B.
I'm saying deeply consider it. Next up, we have Shocking Grasp. This is a damage-dealing cantrip that has a range of touch and allows you to grab an enemy and shock them. It deals 1d8 lightning damage, and if they are wearing metal armor, you have advantage on the attack roll against them. In addition, they can't take reactions if they are hit by this attack. This is an interesting cantrip to me. It has several pros and several cons, and that makes it kind of confusing for me. I love that it has advantage against armored targets. That makes sense. It's great. Love it.
Very flavorful.
Very flavorful.
Yeah.
Stopping reactions, also great.
Feels appropriate. It's like, it's a jolt. It's like, ah!
And also as a spellcaster...
I just imagine when you cast the spell...
You rub your feet on the carpet and then...
I imagine that Shocking Grasp is... Yeah, it's the spell where you shuffle up to someone and do like the zit.
That's how all the spellcasters do it. Now here's the pros and cons working together. This is a great cantrip if you are playing a spellcaster who gets stuck in a situation where, oh no, the bad guy's gotten up to me. I can now shock them and get away because they can't take reactions. However, wasting a cantrip slot on something that requires touch on a spellcaster who definitely doesn't want to be in touch range, that's where the problem comes in. And that's the big negative for me is I don't want to be in the situation where Shocking Grasp is the best cantrip. I think that this is a B because there are some cool benefits here. B for benefits, but also it's kind of a emergency cantrip, not my go-to cantrip. I don't want to be in touch range of my enemies.
Yeah, I gave it a C. I just don't. I don't think I've seen. Have I seen someone use this cantrip? It's such a classic D&D-ism. And there's with the shuffle and everything like that. I just can't remember the last time I've actually seen someone use this in a game.
Is it useful on a blade singer?
No, because you're going to hit them with your sword.
Yeah, you're true. Again, if you're in touch range, this isn't your go-to option.
Yeah.
If you're a melee spellcaster, this isn't your go-to option.
Yeah.
If you're a at-range spellcaster, which is majority of them, you don't want to be in this situation. It does help you get out of that situation, and that's the key. Are you playing some sort of class, subclass where you have too many cantrips to choose? Then this might be the one to save you if you get into melee combat.
Yeah, but I mean... there's so many.
Yeah, you can. There's Misty Step. I mean, there are spells. Yeah. This is a cantrip.
Yeah.
But there are spells that I could use to get out of situations in a better way.
Yep. Spare the Dying is D tier at best. It has a touch ranged, and here's why: you stabilize a dying creature as an action, and at touch range, which is cool if you didn't have a healer's kit. But if you had a healer's kit, you could have done the same thing. And if you had a potion, you could have poured it down their throat. And if you had a million other ways to get them back going again, you would have done them first. I just feel that Spare the Dying is one of those cantrips that, in theory, it would be good if it had like a range of 30 feet.
And there are some subclasses who can make use of that.
But otherwise, no.
Now, it's interesting that you say this because I think I'm also going to give it a D. I was thinking of giving it a C because I do have a player in my current game who has Spare the Dying. And at first I was like, they use it all the time. So it works. It saved lives. But that player also has Healing Word. And I understand sometimes they're like, I didn't want to use a spell slot. But every time they've used Spare the Dying, I'm sitting there with my mouth shut being like, why didn't they just use Healing Word? Every time I'm like, they should have just used Healing Word. It would have done a way better job than Spare the Dying. Yeah. Because when they use Spare the Dying, it's like, oh no, the wizard's down. Spare the Dying. Wizard's still down.
Yeah. I don't want to be that DM, but like, I have seen it used. And every time it was used as the DM, I was like, I got a coup de grace you. I didn't do that. I didn't do it. Because that's like very vindictive thing. But I'm like, every time I've seen Spare the Dying used, I felt like it was a situation where leaving that person on the ground and not stabilized and in safety and with hit points. And that's the whole thing. Is like, if you're in a situation where you can touch somebody and they're dying on the ground, you don't want them to just be stable and still there. You want to either get them out of there, get them out of danger, or you want to heal them and get them back on their feet on their own. I think that in DM culture, that's what we would call a dick move, along the lines of like counterspelling a healing word, but it's still just not worth it.
Yeah, I think that this is D tier. Can it save lives? Yes, but I feel like you have so many other ways to do it that are way more beneficial, and actually using Spare the Dying feels bad. The player's like, oh, you saved me. Okay, well, it's your turn.
Like, Spare the Dying should not be your plan A for saving people's lives. It shouldn't be your plan B. It shouldn't even be your plan C.
It's oh no, I'm out of spell slots and I have to save somebody. I guess I have Spare the Dying.
Yeah.
Which, hopefully you're not in that situation ever.
Yeah.
And why did you waste a cantrip on this for the, well, I guess I'm out of spell slots. Like, it's just...
Yeah. Don't take it.
Don't take it.
Don't take it.
Sword Burst. A bunch of swords appear around you in a burst, and every creature within 5 feet of you has to make a dexterity saving throw or take 1d6 damage. The damage increases as you level up.
See, I imagine it as like a sword burst. Like, I imagine you're holding your sword and somehow like the sword explodes, or like you do that like million cuts thing in the air all around you. I don't know. The spectral swords thing is also cool, but I mean, if you have a couple enemies around you and they're minions with 1 hit point, this is great.
Yeah, but this falls into the similar category that we were talking about with Shocking Grasp, where this advertises a situation that I don't want to be in. Oh no, I'm surrounded by enemies. I'm going to do 1d6 damage to all of them. Will it kill them? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Relatively unlikely, actually, in D&D.
The thing with Sword Burst as well, and this is where it really gets into its diminishing returns. The characters that want to take this cantrip are the spellcasting warriors, like Blade Singers and Hexblades. And so, by the time, if we just imagine at level 5, when those characters, level 5 or 6, when those characters have 2 attacks, they can either make 2 attacks with their action, or they could cast Sword Burst, and the Sword Burst does 2d6 damage on a failed save because it has built up. But for most of these characters, if they have 2 enemies around them, their own melee attacks are going to deal more damage and be more reliable, because attack rolls are generally more reliable than saving throws are in most cases, especially a dexterity saving throw, and especially for melee characters. So even in a scenario where you're the character that takes this spell, that is the character that's built around this spell, in most cases, even when 2 enemies are beside you, your normal melee attacks are probably still better. And even if you're surrounded by 3 enemies, if you're surrounded by 3 enemies at that point,
so this is the thing, is now we're in the situation where the useful time for this is, oh no, I have 3 or 4 enemies surrounding me. In which case, 1 or 2d6 might not do much of anything to any of them.
Yeah.
And I would rather blow a spell slot to do something that affects multiple targets around me in a bigger way. So again, we're now in that situation of, oh no, I'm out of spell slots and surrounded by enemies, which is a situation that if you're in, shouldn't happen very often. And so, did you use one of your limited cantrip options for this, oh no, I'm out of spell slots and surrounded by enemies situation that might never happen?
And I feel like this is that important thing, is like, cantrips can be used at will, but your character only gets to know a limited number of them. So that's kind of the counterbalance thing here. It's like there's no cost to using the cantrip. It's not true that there's no cost to using a cantrip. You had to choose it as a build option, and you have to make the choice to use the cantrip instead of the other things that you could have done on your turn. Swordburst is a C- for me.
I was just going to give it a D. I don't think I've ever seen anybody take it. Even if they've built around it, it can do some neat things, but it's not their best choice.
Yeah, like...
I think it's a trap.
Yeah. Okay, I agree. It's a trap. So next up, we come to Thaumaturgy. What can we say about this spell that we haven't said about Druidcraft and Prestidigitation?
Not much. I literally refer to the spell as Prestidigitation for clerics.
And for that reason, it's solid. I love that you can do the booming voice. This actually feels like the Gandalf intimidating Bilbo Baggins sort of thing. I really like Thaumaturgy, and I think it's a great cantrip. It's got all these thematic things. It's not your first pick, but it shouldn't be your last pick.
I think it's B, similar to what we said about Prestidigitation, although I think I give Prestidigitation an A, because I still think Prestidigitation is the best of all of them. I have seen a wonderful example. The moment I fell in love with Thaumaturgy was actually in Cragmaw Cave. I had a cleric playing.
This was one of the first games you ever ran.
One of the first games I ever ran, and a player at my table used Thaumaturgy in the room where the goblins were all around the campfire to cause the campfire to burst into green flames, and a booming voice came out claiming that it was the god of goblins. And it scared, and like I had a bunch of rolls happen, and the goblins were all terrified. They all fled, and like several of them were like bowing down to the fire, and the cleric was able to communicate his demands through the fire to these scared goblins using only Thaumaturgy. So that was one of the very first games I ever DM'd, but in that moment I was like, wow, Thaumaturgy, what fun.
Next up, we got Thorn Whip. This is a druid cantrip with a 30-foot range. You send out a thorny vine that deals 1d6 piercing damage on a hit to the target, and it pulls them 10 feet towards you if they are large or smaller. I love this cantrip. It ticks so many of my boxes because it does magical piercing damage, which nothing in the game will resist that. Maybe there's something, but I don't know what it is off the top of my head. It works on an attack roll, not a saving throw. So if you hit, you pull them forward, and that gives it so much utility. I think that this is a real sleeper hit of a cantrip that I think more characters should consider taking. I especially love taking it on my clerics to use to yank people into Spirit Guardians with.
I've seen this used to great effect with Spirit Guardians and Moonbeam, and really, it doesn't have to be your area of effect. If there's any area of effect on the table, you can drag enemies into it. You stand on one side, they're trying to get out the other, you keep dragging them back in. The only detriment that I see here is that it pulls enemies towards you, which isn't always your favorite thing to do, especially if there's not something hazardous to drag them into. However, with a range of 30 feet and pulling them 10 feet, there are so many times that you can put a hazard between you and your enemy and then pull them into it. If there's a pit and there's enemies firing at you from the other side of the pit and you can just yoink them into the pit.
Yes.
It's such a useful cantrip that I think that this is the S tier pick. I think that if you have access to it, it should be a go-to.
I'm not going to go as far as giving it an S tier, but I am going to give it an A+.
I am actually surprised because I know it's one of your favorite cantrips in the game.
It is one of my favorite cantrips. I think that it's almost Eldritch Blast with an invocation on it.
But you only get one instead of multiple.
Because it's also available to artificers now, you can get it as an intelligence-based spell through Magic Initiate as well. So I really wonder if there's interesting wizardy things to do with it too.
I think there's I might just be a sucker for battlefield maneuvering. Any ability to move characters on the battlefield I love. And that's why I'm giving it the S tier. I just think that there's so much utility, and it does decent damage, and it's a ranged attack. And really, I'm rating it based on who it's available for. I'm not rating this necessarily for like, it's S tier. If you're a sorcerer, take it. And maybe you'll pick up Magic Initiate to grab it because of the utility it has. That's why I think there is possibility that other classes might want to grab it. But for druids, must have.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think you should definitely try to get it as a cleric. I think that my next wizard, I'm going to try to get it. Somehow it's worth it just to do this shenaniganery with it.
Next up, we have Thunderclap. It explodes sound out around you, dealing 1d6 damage to enemies around you. If you didn't like the Sword Burst, you're going to like Thunderclap less. The reason why I say less is because my least favorite thing about this cantrip is the very first sentence that says it creates an audible clap out to 100 feet. Any party who's trying to remotely be stealthy can't if you use this cantrip. Not only is it the anti-stealth, but even if you're not being stealthy, if you're in a dungeon and you're fighting enemies in a room, and the DM knows that there's a room 5 rooms away that also has enemies in it, and you use Thunderclap, as a DM, I have every reason to imagine that every creature in this dungeon is now aware that thunder just went off inside the dungeon, and that probably means there's a spellcaster casting some sort of thunder spell in the dungeon, and now the entire dungeon is alerted to your presence and going to ambush you. I think that's a huge detriment. You alert everything within 100 feet to your position, and maybe if there's a thunderstorm going on, sure, you can mask it. If there's a thunderstorm going on, how often is that happening? I hate it. I don't like it. I think it's bad. I hate that it has the audible to 100 feet.
You know what's worse about it?
What?
Con saving throw. Sword Burst at least was a dexterity saving throw.
I want to like Thunderclap. I remember when I was early in my D&D career, I read this and I said, ooh, Thunderclap sounds great. And it was literally, I had to be reminded of that first sentence. And yeah, now I've learned that Constitution saving throws are pretty rough. Doing 1d6 damage to every creature around you doesn't do a lot. And again, you don't want to be surrounded.
You really have to have a lot of creatures around you that are going to die to that damage.
And be willing to alert every other creature around you, because you have to use this cantrip or die, I guess. I would rather die. If you didn't catch, we're giving this the S tier.
No, it's a D tier spell.
It's a D tier.
Yeah, don't take it. One spell, though, that you should take, and I've been pretty stingy with the S tier rankings, but Toll the Dead is an S tier spell.
Even though it requires a saving throw and not an attack roll.
Yeah, I think it's really good.
Toll the Dead. This is a necromancy spell with a range of 60 feet. You target a creature, they make a wisdom saving throw, and they take 1d8 damage. But here's where it gets really good. If the target is not at their maximum hit points, they instead take 1d12 damage, making it one of the highest damage dealing cantrips in the game. Both of these scale as you level up. I agree with giving it an S tier. I'm just surprised because this is one of the few times that a cantrip that requires a saving throw is just such a good option because of that.
Yeah.
As soon as you hit a target, as soon as anybody hits a target, your rogue goes first and lands sneak attack, and oh darn, they didn't kill it. But now you hit them for 1, 2, or 3d12, depending what level you're at. You can knock out enemies with that damage.
Yeah, I just think it's rolling a bunch of d12s with this cantrip feels real good, and it's exactly what you want from a cantrip in so many ways, because what makes cantrips interesting to me is that when I think about my strategy as a spellcaster, I go, okay, I'm going to start the battle by laying down that really important concentration spell, and then I want to start helping out taking the enemies out. And a cantrip like Toll the Dead is really good because you're getting that big boost of damage, and it doesn't ask you to take anything else. It's not like Eldritch Blast. Like, again, it's not as good as it's not as S tier as Eldritch Blast, right? It's just, but the thing is that it doesn't need any other augmentations, and it's available to so many other characters and classes. So because it just is good, it's on its own, it doesn't need to have any augmentations or adulterations. It's just a good spell that does a lot of damage, and yes, it's a wisdom saving throw, but fortunately, wisdom is one of those saving throws that is stronger to target, except against bosses. Because usually the boss monsters, the legendary monsters, the spellcasters, they tend to have the good wisdom saving throws, but the minions don't. And that's exactly what you want a cantrip for. Because the big scary boss, yeah, I'm going to use my scary spells against them. I'm not going to, like...
I try to avoid using a cantrip against a boss. I'm using my highest level spells and working my way down until I'm out. Then I'm going to cantrips. So, absolutely. And I also want to say that in terms of theme, I'm a theme guy. the thematic elements of this spell. I love even the name Toll the Dead gives me the image of like a bell ringing
For
and
whom the bell tolls, man.
The
Yes.
ferryman of death shows up to drag their soul away. Like, I don't know, there's
Yeah.
so many cool ways to interpret how Toll the Dead comes to life at your table. And I just think it's such a beautiful macabre spell to imagine, and it delivers. It delivers on the idea that that person's injured, they're dying, the bell's tolling for them. Here comes death.
Yeah. I just, this spell, I always think of AC/DC, Hell's Bells. That's what it'll always sound like to me, that bell from that song.
There you go. Hell's Bells in a cantrip. We move from one of the best cantrips in the game to one of the worst cantrips in the game, where we come to True Strike. Now, I have heard arguments online on how True Strike can be useful. And to those people I say, good job. Have fun with it. I think True Strike is pretty trash. It is a cantrip that requires concentration. It requires an action. It allows your next attack to have advantage, provided the spell hasn't ended, which means that your enemies have an entire round to knock you out of your concentration. It's one of the few cantrips that requires concentration.
Oh, yeah, that makes it so awful.
You're giving up your turn to gain advantage. There are so many ways to gain advantage in this game. Using an action is not one of them.
Yeah, and it asks for your concentration, and there's no way. One of the things that I've said many times about True Strike is that there's no way to game it so that you can get the advantage right away, because it explicitly says that it must be the attack that you make on your next turn against the target. One attack. So, mathematically speaking, you're better off simply attacking twice. It is never, even if that is across two separate turns, that is better than using True Strike, because at least you could potentially hit twice instead of just once. So that is why it is an absolute garbage tier spell. And I've heard people say, oh, but you could use it to set up an ambush. The thing is that if you're ambushing someone, you already got advantage because they can't see you and you have advantage against them. So really, attempts to make True Strike, as it is currently written, good or workable, feel like attempts to dress up a dog's breakfast after it's already come out the backside of the dog. Don't take True Strike. And don't tell me why it's good. It's never going to be good. Don't try to make it good. It's not good.
If it didn't require concentration and you could cast it as a bonus action, sure.
But then it would probably be a first level spell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think True Strike is a vicious mockery of what a cantrip could be.
Yes. Actually, that's a great vicious mockery. You think True Strike is a good spell. No. But on the flip side, vicious mockery is a wonderful spell. And a great cantrip. I think it's an absolute A-tier cantrip, especially for bards, who are the only characters who can take it. And I think that every bard should take it, bar none.
Yeah, and this is why it's an A tier. I don't think Vicious Mockery is a cantrip that other classes would go out of their way to try to obtain. So it's not S tier. But A tier means that if you have access to it, which means if you're a bard, then you should deeply consider it. So if you're a bard, deeply consider taking Vicious Mockery. It also, again, thematic. What bard doesn't want to kill a minion by insulting them? It's what you want to do as a bard. You suck and they die. It's great.
And if you don't, you've just discouraged them. Just as bards get bardic inspiration, they get bardic demotivation. Thanks, Kyle, for that one. And it's fantastic. Wisdom saving throw, D4 damage. So not a lot of damage, but it is psychic damage. It is a wisdom save. And disadvantage on their next attack. So you get a little bit of damage, and you get to make them a little bit worse at attacking your friends. What's not to love about it? So we didn't like Swordburst.
Yeah.
We didn't like Thunderclap. Maybe third time's the charm. Do we like Word of Radiance?
I like it 2% more than Swordburst and maybe 5% more than Thunderclap. I still don't think it's my go-to cantrip in any scenario.
No.
The same idea. We have a 5-foot radius. You're doing radiant damage this time, but it's a Constitution saving throw.
Can we just ask the upfront question? How did the same cantrip get made like 3 times?
And they're all not great.
Like, it really feels like...
Somebody's really trying to make... Stop trying to make area of effect 5-foot range spells happen. It's not going to happen.
But the thing with this is trying the same thing multiple times and expecting different results is like the definition of insanity.
It is.
And
but
so
they're switching up the damage type and the saving throw, which they're just going across different damage types and different saving throws, but
availability for different classes.
And availability. So no matter what class you are, you can waste a cantrip choice on one of these cantrips.
Yeah, I just don't see like the I guess the value of an AoE cantrip. I think amongst the designers, the value of AoEs on cantrips is obviously inflated, right?
Well, you don't get many cantrips that can hit multiple targets, so I will give all of these that. But again, they're for a situation that, as a spellcaster with cantrips, I just have a million tools to avoid, and I don't want to rely on one of my cantrip choices thinking I'm going to get into that situation.
Yeah, and I just genuinely feel, to reiterate one final time, it is not worth casting against a single enemy. Against 2 enemies, it's about as good. Like, it's still worse than if you had 2 attacks that you just attacked 2 different enemies. And if there's 3 enemies, it's still not good. So, and if you're surrounded, and also to put the counterpoint to it, if you're actually surrounded by a bunch of enemies who are going to get killed by like 2d6 points of damage, then like, are you even that afraid? Like the counterpoint there is or maybe you're really scared and you just absolutely need to get out. Like that's the whole thing. It's like if you're surrounded by enough enemies where you're at the point where it's worth using the spell, this spell better kill them, because if it doesn't, you're in trouble.
I'm a person who likes to be sure about things, and rather than use a cantrip, I would blow a spell slot on Thunderstep in any of these situations in a heartbeat.
Yes, and that's just it. Or maybe you're an evocation wizard and you can fireball your own head, right? I just think that by the time these cantrips are never good at any point of play, just don't take them.
Yeah, D tier.
So that's it. We did all the cantrips in 5th edition and tier ranked them.
Let's take a minute to put up on screen all of Monty and my S tier cantrips. So up on screen right now, these are all the cantrips that we gave S tier to. Some standout options.
Pretty predictable.
Yeah.
But
if you have access to these cantrips, check them out. If you can pick all these cantrips, go for it.
These are the ones that are worth taking Magic Initiate and the other related feats to get. And even though you might only get one of the cantrips from this list, because not all of them are available to all classes, what you can do is you can grab Eldritch Blast and your other favorite and Hex. Or you can grab Guidance and Toll the Dead and Healing Word. That might be perhaps one of my favorites. Or I really like getting Guidance and Thorn Whip.
Up on screen now, you're going to see the A tiers. This might not be one that you go out of your way to get from a different class, but if you're one of the classes that has access to these cantrips, these ones should be top of your list for checking out. A lot of great options here, and honestly, A is kind of the sweet spot. You're not going to multi-class to grab these necessarily, but if you're multi-classing anyway, then yeah, definitely. I think these are all great.
In the B tier ones that you're seeing on screen right now, these ones are, your mileage may vary. There's a lot of our classic favorites like Prestidigitation and Druidcraft and Thaumaturgy. These are spells that are fun, but they are not necessarily the best spell in adventuring situations. They're certainly worthwhile, and we enjoy taking them with all of our characters just because they're so much fun, even though they don't always have the most practical applications.
I think that if you have 3 or more cantrip choices, choosing an S tier, an A tier, and a B tier will not do you wrong. B tier doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that these are going to be slightly more niche or for certain builds, and you can still do a lot with the B tier cantrips.
I think it's hard, though, with the B tier, because the B tier cantrips are competing against Mage Hand, Guidance, Eldritch Blast,
Minor Illusion, and many characters would just love to have all those. When we look at the C tier, these are ones that you should be careful about. They may not do what you're hoping for them to do. However, if you're building a character and one of these stands out as, hey, this would actually really benefit the build that I'm going for, there is a chance that these niche situation cantrips could be useful for you in the right campaign, on the right build, on the right character. There might need to be a lot of things going right for you to use them, but be careful choosing them.
And for these D tier cantrips, just don't take them. Just don't.
You can ignore them.
Just,
you can
just don't.
scratch
Just
them out of your book.
Pretend they're just not in the game.
Yeah, if you remove all of these from the book and just like put a marker over top of them and say, nope, these aren't here, then you're not going to lose anything from the game of D&D.
On the flip side, we would be curious to hear your opinions on what you would do to fix the D tier cantrips. And tell us about that in the comments below, because maybe we'll come back and talk about a couple different solutions that when Wizards of the Coast looks at this again for D&D 1, maybe these are the ones that should get looked at. Conversely, do you think some of the S tiers are way too powerful? Should they get nerfed? Should they get changed? Tell us in the comments.
You can also let us know if you've had any really big successes. I want to hear stories of, actually, those B and C tier cantrips you picked have had great success. Mind you, I do see a lot of stories that are, this had great success in my game in this very specific situation, which is exactly why they get B or C tier. But I still love hearing those stories. I love to hear how people got... Actually, tell me how Sword Burst worked in your game. I want to know about the time that it saved the day. Let me know in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible with the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work we do here on YouTube, want to help make this possible for us to do on such a regular basis, and want to join our amazing Discord community, please check us out by following the links in the description below.
And if you want to see us using a lot of cantrips in our games, you can check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, which is Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty more videos about all the spells in D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.